when a middle-aged man living alone on his peaceful 5-acre farmland receives a chilling nuclear attack warning, his quiet world shatters. With only minutes to act, he grabs his loyal dog and a pack of essentials, retreating into a long-forgotten cave on his property. As nuclear fire reigns above, he survives deep underground, relying on his wits, instincts, and a crackling radio. Over 7 harrowing days, he uncovers the cave's hidden depths, long-buried secrets, and a shocking clue that survival may depend on more than just food and water. The end of the world was only the beginning of something stranger. The warning. I always liked the quiet. 5 acres of farmland nestled in a sun-soaked valley, far enough from town to breathe easy, but close enough that I could still run in for supplies if needed. It had been my refuge since the divorce, and honestly, the peace suited me just fine. No neighbors knocking at odd hours. No noisy highways. Just me, the land, and my dog Rufus, a hefty German shepherd with a heart of gold and the ears of a hawk. The mornings were my favorite. I'd rise before dawn, brew a pot of strong coffee, feed the chickens, and walk the fence line with Rufus trotting beside me. Sometimes I'd talk to him like he was a person. He always listened better than most people ever did. My days were filled with tending the garden, fixing things around the property, or simply sitting on the porch watching the wind play through the trees. Life was simple. Predictable. Until it wasn't. That Monday started like any other. The sun rose behind the hills, casting a golden light over the dewy grass. I had just come back inside after feeding the birds when my old flip phone vibrated so hard on the counter it startled me. That thing rarely buzzed only junk texts or the occasional weather alert. But this time it was different. In bold letters across the tiny screen were words that made my blood run cold: immediate action required, nuclear attack warning. Seek shelter immediately. I stood there, staring at the screen. I blinked twice, like it might go away if I did. Rufus tilted his head and let out a low whine, his instincts kicking in before I even moved. The radio on the kitchen shelf crackled to life. I'd left it on a low volume earlier, just background noise. Now the announcer's voice came through shaky and urgent: multiple warheads detected inbound, estimated impact within the hour, all citizens urged to shelter underground if possible. This is not a drill. My chest tightened. My first thought was, is this a mistake? Some kind of test? But it wasn't April Fool's Day, and the man's voice didn't sound like he was kidding. I turned off the stove, my half-cooked eggs forgotten, and grabbed my bug-out list from the drawer. I had prepared over the years just in case. Some folks had laughed at me when I started stockpiling water, canned goods, filters, batteries, and medical supplies. Paranoid, they said. I called it being ready. And now that readiness was about to be tested. Rufus, we're going in the cave, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His ears perked up, and he followed me as I moved into gear. I had a plan for something like this. Not perfect, but workable. About 200 yards past the tree line at the back of my land was an old limestone cave I'd found years ago while clearing brush. I'd reinforced the mouth with timber and made it into a makeshift storm shelter. Over the last year, I'd quietly stocked it, nothing fancy, just the basics: water jugs, dried food, solar lights, my crank radio, a few tools, and a cot. It was never meant to be permanent, but it could hold me for a week if it had to. And now, it had to. I hauled the backpack out from under my bed already packed with essentials and slung it over my shoulder. Then I grabbed Rufus's leash, although I rarely used it, and my shotgun from the closet. You never know what kind of madness follows a crisis. Before leaving the house, I shut off the main breaker and gas valve. I didn't know if the house would still be standing in an hour, but if it was, I didn't want to come back to a fire. Outside, the sky was still clear and beautiful, mocking, in a way. A warm breeze moved through the trees as if the world was unaware of what was coming. The birds chirped, the chickens clucked, and the sun glowed as if it was just another peaceful morning. I moved fast, Rufus sticking close. My boots crunched on the dry leaves as we cut across the back pasture. I had stashed a small wagon near the tree line, loaded with extra supplies I hadn't moved into the cave yet. I hooked it up, checked the load, blankets, more canned goods, water jugs, and hauled it down the narrow path toward the cave. As I reached the entrance, I heard another broadcast cut in through my radio. The voice was more panicked now, the signal weaker. Estimated time to impact, 30 minutes, shelter in place, maintain calm. I pulled the timber door open and ushered Rufus inside. The cave was cool and smelled faintly of damp stone and dry earth. I lit one of the solar lanterns and hung it on a nail in the rock. The light flickered softly, revealing the shelves I'd set up along one wall and the cot tucked into the back. I closed the door behind us and braced it with a metal rod. Outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. As I sat on the cot and scratched Rufus behind the ears, I muttered, "Well, buddy, let's see if we're really ready for the end of the world." The moment I shut that cave door and wedged it tight, something inside me shifted. It wasn't panic, exactly, but a deep, raw awareness that I had just stepped out of the world I knew and into something entirely uncertain. My ears strained for sounds outside, as if I might hear the distant scream of missiles overhead or the far-off rumble of sirens, but it was quiet, eerily quiet. Rufus lay at my feet, his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on me. He was calm, but alert. Dogs know things. I'd learned to trust his instincts more than my own, especially in the wild. I sat for a few minutes in silence, then rose and moved to check the shelves. The supplies were where I'd left them: plastic bins of rice, beans, canned meats, powdered milk, peanut butter. I had a big metal container of fresh water, at least 40 liters, along with smaller jugs for easy pouring. A pair of manual filters were tucked in with the cookware. I had candles, batteries, 2 solar lanterns, a wind-up flashlight, and a crank radio that doubled as a USB charger. My first aid kit was stocked tight, complete with antibiotics, gauze, iodine, and a few painkillers I'd picked up the last time I was in town. I ran through a quick mental checklist. Water, food, air, warmth, security — those were the basics. The cave was about 30 feet deep, cool, and dry, with narrow tunnels splitting off at the back, which I hadn't explored more than a few feet. I'd planned to someday, but never had the urgency. That was about to change. For now, the focus was on getting through the first 24 hours. I checked my watch. Only 15 minutes had passed since the alert. I couldn't believe how fast everything had changed. Less than an hour ago I was frying eggs. Now I was waiting for nuclear warheads to level half the country. I flicked on the radio and turned the knob slowly, hoping for a signal. After a bit of static, a voice broke through. It was a different announcer now, female, reading from what sounded like a script. Repeat, this is not a test. A nuclear strike is imminent. Cities confirmed as potential targets include New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Fallout is expected to spread for hundreds of miles. Remain in shelter for at least 72 hours. Do not attempt to leave. Repeat, do not attempt to leave. I sat back against the stone wall, exhaling through clenched teeth. Los Angeles. That was over 200 miles away, but radiation doesn't care about distance when the wind gets involved. I was far enough out in the country to avoid the blast, but fallout? That was trickier. That's why I chose the cave. Soil and rock offer the best protection against gamma radiation, far better than wood or brick. From everything I'd read, the goal was to put as much dense mass between you and the outside as possible. The deeper underground, the better. I'd stacked up sandbags along the inside walls last summer, mostly as insulation. Now they felt like my life insurance. I gave Rufus a can of dog food and poured him a bowl of water. He ate calmly, chewing slowly, his tail thumping once against the floor when I spoke to him. I made myself a meal of canned chili and some dry crackers. Not fancy, but it would keep me going. I tried not to think about what was happening above ground, but the images forced their way in: skyscrapers vanishing in fireballs, highways melting, people running with nowhere to go. I'd seen enough documentaries to know what a nuclear strike looked like. What I didn't know was how much would be left when this was over. I pulled out my notebook, just a simple spiral-bound one I kept for thoughts and plans, and began documenting everything. Date, time of warning, supplies inventory, radio messages. It might seem obsessive, but when chaos takes over, routine is what keeps your mind from slipping. The first few hours passed slowly. I read a paperback thriller by lantern light, checked the radio every 15 minutes, paced the floor. My watch ticked louder than usual. Rufus fell asleep, his breathing steady, and I was grateful for the sound. The cave's silence had weight to it, like being buried in stone. Around dusk, though it was hard to tell without sunlight, the radio picked up a faint update. The announcer said at least 4 warheads had struck the continental U.S. and fallout was already beginning to spread eastward. Radiation readings were extremely high in multiple zones. The power grid was down in most of the country. Panic had overtaken major cities. I closed my eyes and tried not to picture the chaos. I thought about my brother in Nevada. About my old co-workers in LA. Were they gone? Alive? I couldn't know. That was the worst part, knowing that everything outside might already be ash, and there was nothing I could do. I pulled Rufus closer and leaned back on the cot. "We'll wait, boy," I whispered. "We've got what we need. We wait. And we survive." Morning and night didn't mean much anymore. With no sunlight reaching us in the cave, time blurred. I checked my watch often, trying to keep a rhythm, but it was like drifting in a dark current with no shore in sight. Rufus stirred beside me as I sat up on the second day, though really, it could have been midnight for all I knew. I gave him water, then reached for the radio and slowly cranked it. The static was louder than usual, but eventually I found a faint signal. Radiation levels remain hazardous in most affected regions, advised minimum shelter time extended to 7 days, rescue operations underway in unaffected zones, further instructions to follow. That was both a relief and a gut punch. 7 days underground. I had enough food and water to make it, even if it meant rationing a bit tighter. The bigger issue was the waiting, doing nothing while the world outside possibly burned. I knew I had to keep busy or I'd lose my grip. That's when I looked toward the back of the cave. Years ago, when I first found this place, I'd only gone in about 20 feet. Beyond that, the tunnel narrowed and curved off into blackness. I'd always meant to explore it more, maybe map it out, but life had a way of distracting me with chores and seasons. But now I had time, and the idea of uncovering something unknown felt better than sitting and imagining mushroom clouds. I loaded my backpack with supplies, a flashlight, rope, a solar lantern, a folding knife, chalk for marking walls, and an extra bottle of water. I scratched Rufus behind the ears. "Stay here, boy. I won't go far." He gave me a look, the kind that said, "You're a damn fool," but stayed put on the blanket I'd laid for him. I moved carefully toward the back of the cave. The air changed subtly, cooler and wetter. The rock under my boots turned slick in places. I made sure to mark the walls with a quick swipe of chalk every few paces, just in case I had to double back in a hurry. About 20 feet in, the tunnel narrowed to where I had to duck slightly. The beam of my flashlight danced across walls glistening with moisture and strange patterns. Was it limestone? Granite? I'm no geologist, but something about the space felt old, older than anything man-made. Another 10 feet in, the tunnel widened again, and the ground leveled out. That's when I found the first sign that I wasn't the first one to walk these stones. Carved into the wall was a crude symbol. A triangle with 3 circles inside it. Not random graffiti, no spray paint or names. Just this symbol, etched deep into the stone. My heart started thumping. It could have been Native American, or maybe some bored miner from 100 years ago. Either way, someone else had been down here, and that gave me a weird sense of connection, like I wasn't entirely alone. I kept moving. The path dipped slightly and opened into a small chamber, no bigger than a shed. In the center was a pile of stones, intentionally stacked. Maybe a marker, maybe just someone's idea of a cairn. I sat on a flat rock and drank some water, then shut off my light for a moment. The darkness swallowed me instantly. It was so complete, I couldn't even see my hand an inch from my face. I turned the light back on quickly, heart pounding. I wasn't afraid of the dark, but there's something ancient about cave blackness. It makes you feel small, like the earth itself could crush you without a second thought. After about an hour of slow exploration, I made my way back. I'd marked the walls well, and Rufus was waiting exactly where I'd left him. His tail thumped twice as I entered, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Miss me?" I said, sitting down beside him. I noted what I'd seen in my notebook: symbols, depth, chamber size, and sketched the triangle symbol from memory. I didn't know if it meant anything, but it felt important. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my brain just needed something to chew on besides fear. That evening, if you could call it that, I boiled some rice and jerky in a pot with a bouillon cube. Rufus got his usual rations, and we both ate quietly. The radio had gone silent again, nothing but static, but I kept it nearby just in case. I lay back on the cot, staring up at the rocky ceiling. The air was thick but breathable. I could hear the faint dripping of water deep inside the tunnel, steady as a heartbeat. As my eyes grew heavy, I told myself we were one day closer to the end of this nightmare. I didn't know what the world would look like when I walked out of this cave, but if it still had breath and dirt and a sky, I'd find a way to keep going. On the third day, I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat and heart pounding. I had dreamed of sirens, long, screaming ones blending with the sound of wind and fire. But when I sat up, all I heard was Rufus breathing softly beside me and the slow drip of water echoing from the cave's depths. I checked the radio. More static. I turned the dial gently, hoping for any hint of a signal, but nothing came through. The silence felt heavier now. There's a strange pressure that comes with isolation, like your own thoughts are starting to echo louder than the outside world. To push that feeling back, I made a plan: keep the day structured. I gave Rufus his food and water first, then made myself oatmeal with powdered milk and a handful of raisins I'd packed in a vacuum jar. I ate slowly, savoring the texture more than the taste. Everything routine was a lifeline now. After breakfast, I inventoried my supplies again. I was still in good shape, plenty of food, nearly 30 liters of water remaining, 2 backup filters I hadn't touched yet, and my backup flashlight and solar charger both holding power. The air inside the cave had stayed relatively fresh, thanks to the narrow vent I'd carved upward near the entrance. It wasn't much, just a pipe buried in gravel and mesh to prevent debris or small animals, but it helped circulate air slowly. That little bit of planning might have saved me. Around midday, the radio finally crackled to life for a few seconds. I dropped everything and ran to it, cranking the handle to get enough juice. The voice was faint, breaking in and out. Radiation still above safe threshold, do not exit shelters, government continuity plan, emergency response delayed, and then it vanished. No location, no names, no reassurance. Just more silence. I stared at the device for a full minute before slowly setting it down. So we were still in danger, still advised to stay hidden. I hadn't expected a miracle. But hearing a voice, any voice, felt like holding onto a fraying rope in a dark ocean. I jotted the message into my notebook. That afternoon, I returned to the back of the cave, this time with Rufus. He'd insisted on following me the moment I picked up the flashlight. His ears were up, tail twitching with alertness. Something about the tunnel unsettled him, but he wouldn't let me go alone. I led the way with the lantern, marking again as we walked deeper. We passed the triangle carving and the cairn from the day before, then followed the tunnel as it sloped gently to the right. The deeper we went, the more the air smelled of whetstone and something older, moss maybe, or just the memory of trapped time. After about 40 yards, the tunnel widened into another chamber. This one was different. It was domed, with the ceiling rising high enough that my lantern couldn't touch the top. But more importantly, on the far wall, there were more carvings. Dozens of them. Some familiar simple arrows, sun shapes, spirals. But others I didn't recognize at all. Strange lines crisscrossing like veins, symbols that almost looked like letters but weren't. I stared for a long time, feeling goosebumps rise on my arms. Rufus let out a low growl. Not aggressive, just a warning. A sense of something he couldn't explain. "I know, boy," I said. "It's weird down here." I sketched some of the symbols into my notebook. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Ancient cave art? Cryptic messages from long-gone wanderers? Or just bored explorers marking time? I didn't know. But it gave me something to think about besides mushroom clouds and radiation burns. After maybe an hour, we headed back. I didn't want to push deeper without better oxygen reserves. Back in the main chamber, I rechecked the seals around the door and made sure the entrance pipe was still intact. No odd smells, no rushes of wind. That was good. The last thing I needed was fallout drifting in. I passed the evening cleaning the few utensils I used, brushing Rufus, and checking the water levels. I used a cloth to sponge bathe with some warm water and baking soda, just to feel human again. Hygiene, even in survival, is more than cleanliness, it's sanity. I thought about my old life for the first time since sealing the cave. My truck. My tool shed. My porch swing. The world that had seemed so stable, gone in a blink. And the thing is, I never got a goodbye. No warning, no chance to hug anyone or shake a friend's hand. Just a message on a phone and then a race into stone. Rufus nuzzled into my side as I lay on the cot that night. I scratched behind his ears and whispered, "We're doing good, buddy. One day at a time." I didn't sleep well that night. Something had changed in the cave. It wasn't the temperature or the air, both of those stayed the same, but it was like the silence had grown too deep, too unnatural. Even Rufus was restless. He paced a few times, then lay down, only to lift his head again at odd intervals like he was hearing something I couldn't. Around what my watch said was 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not loud. Not sharp. Just different. It was a soft scraping, like stone against stone, from somewhere down the tunnel. My pulse jumped. I sat up slowly and listened. Rufus was already on alert, ears stiff, his head turned toward the dark. The sound came again, scrape, pause, then a faint shuffle. I held my breath. My rational mind told me it was probably water dripping, maybe a rock shifting. But my gut disagreed. That wasn't random noise. That was movement. I grabbed the flashlight and slowly stood. "Stay," I whispered to Rufus, though I knew he wouldn't. Sure enough, he followed close as I stepped toward the back of the cave. I didn't go far. Just to the edge of the entrance to the deeper tunnels. I shined my light in. Nothing moved. The beam caught only rough rock walls and the dust in the air. No shadows. No eyes. Still, I stared for a full minute. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again. A whisper. Not a voice. Not words. Just a hiss of air or breath moving across stone from somewhere farther in. That was enough. I backed up slowly, flashlight steady, and returned to the main chamber. Rufus stayed by my leg the whole time, tense but silent. I locked the cave door more securely, wedging a second rod across it and adding some gear in front for weight. Afterward, I sat on the cot, shotgun in my lap, and didn't sleep again that night. By morning, if you could call it that, the radio had returned. The signal was still weak, but clear enough to make out. Emergency responders are mobilizing along unaffected coasts, reports confirm over a dozen strikes, fallout expected to linger for weeks, citizens advised to remain sheltered for at least 7 days, 7 days. That number kept coming up. A week in a hole in the earth, while the world outside burned, twisted, and fell apart. I wasn't claustrophobic, not really, but I started to feel the pressure more now. The rock walls seemed a bit closer. The darkness in the back tunnel felt heavier. I tried to shake it off. I needed to keep my mind strong. Survival was as much mental as physical. I focused on chores. I cleaned my utensils, reorganized the food, added more notes to my journal. I noted the strange noise from the night before, describing it in detail: location, sound type, time. I didn't know if it mattered, but it felt smart to track everything. If my mind started to slip, I'd need a record to help pull me back. Later, I walked Rufus around the main chamber. I'd cleared a small space near the vent pipe where he could stretch and do his business. I was lucky he was trained. He wasn't the kind of dog to make messes or bark without cause. Still, he kept glancing toward the back tunnel, ears twitching. It made me uneasy. After feeding him, I returned to the chamber with the symbols and took my time examining the markings again. The triangle with circles one was repeated, this time upside down. Others looked similar to ancient runes, but nothing I recognized. I ran my hand along one of the carvings. The grooves were deep, deliberate, not the kind you'd make with a pocket knife. Whoever did this, they meant it to last. I wondered what kind of person had made these marks, how long ago, and for what reason. Were they messages? Warnings? Ritual? I snapped myself out of it. I wasn't down here to play archaeologist. I had a limited window to stay sharp and sane. The cave had protected me so far, but that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous in its own right. By evening, I forced myself to eat even though I had no appetite. Beans, rice, and a chunk of dried sausage. Rufus ate as usual. I could tell he was uneasy too. He stayed close, no longer curious, just watchful. When I lay back on the cot, I kept the shotgun beside me, one shell chambered, safety on. The light from the lantern cast long shadows on the wall. I watched them for hours before finally dozing off. Somewhere in the haze between sleep and waking, I thought I heard the scraping again, farther away now. Or maybe closer. but when I opened my eyes, there was only silence and stone. The morning light, or what passed for morning underground, was grey and quiet. I awoke stiff but determined to keep my routine. Rufus was already awake, sitting by the entrance, watching the dim tunnel like a sentinel. I brewed a cup of powdered coffee with hot water from my thermos, careful to ration the fuel in my small stove. The radio was my lifeline, so I turned the crank and flicked the dial. Static greeted me, but soon a clear voice broke through. This is a continuation of the emergency broadcast. Reports confirm that fallout levels remain dangerously high in most affected areas. Do not attempt to leave shelter until further notice. Repeat, do not leave shelter. I listened carefully, then the voice changed. A new speaker now. Attention survivors, a temporary command post has been established in the northern zone near the Oak Ridge facility. Medical aid, food supplies, and shelter are available to those who can reach the location safely. Repeat, Oak Ridge, northern zone. My heart skipped. Oak Ridge was over 60 miles from my property. It was a glimmer of hope, but also a reminder that the outside world was fractured and dangerous. Could I reach them if I survived this? I flipped the radio off, then back on, trying to catch more details. Static swallowed much of the message, but something else caught my attention: a faint, rhythmic tapping layered beneath the broadcast. At first, I thought it was interference, but as I listened longer, the tapping followed a pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps again. Morse code. It had to be. My pulse quickened. Could someone be sending a hidden message through the chaos? I pulled out my old radio manual and Morse code chart, which I'd kept tucked in my supplies. I sat cross-legged on the cot and started to decode the pattern. The first sequence translated to the letter S, the next I, then N, and finally D. Sind. It wasn't a word. Maybe it was part of a longer message. I kept listening and jotting down the taps as best as I could, but the signal faded before I could get more. I stared at my notes, wondering if it was real or my mind playing tricks. The cave suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was a mystery, a puzzle. Who was sending the message? And why? Was it someone like me, trapped somewhere else, trying to reach others? Or was it a warning? I tried not to let my imagination spiral, but it was impossible. I had to stay grounded. I decided to ration my supplies more tightly and set a schedule to listen for the message each day. Maybe, just maybe, I could decode more. The afternoon was filled with cleaning and organizing. I checked my water filters again, disassembled and rinsed them carefully. Clean water was everything. One bad batch could mean days of sickness underground. I also tested the emergency crank flashlight and solar lantern, making sure batteries were charged. I ate a light meal, canned beans with rice, and gave Rufus his ration. He seemed more alert today, following me everywhere. I felt grateful for the company, even if it was just a dog. I returned to the cave's back tunnels, the ones I'd explored before, looking for a safe spot to set up a small workstation. I cleared a flat rock surface, laid out my notebook, radio, and Morse chart. I made a crude map of the cave in my journal, marking the tunnel with symbols and measurements. I thought about the triangle carving and the other strange symbols I'd seen. Was it coincidence that this cave held secrets from the past and now a secret message from the present? Evening came with no new radio transmissions. I lay on the cot, eyes fixed on the cave's rough ceiling, trying to control the thoughts swirling in my head. Survival was becoming more than just food and shelter. It was about hope that I wasn't alone, hope that the world outside still held people trying to make it through. And hope that I could find a way out of this darkness, both literal and figurative. The days were blending together now, 7 days felt like 7 weeks. Time had lost its shape in the cave's darkness. Yet every morning, without fail, Rufus was my alarm clock, nudging me awake with his cold nose and eager eyes. On this morning, as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I noticed something unusual. A faint scent, carried in through the ventilation pipe, something earthy but sharp like fresh pine mixed with smoke. I sniffed the air cautiously. Could it be from outside? Was the wind shifting, bringing news from the world beyond my stone prison? I moved toward the pipe and peered out carefully. The entrance to the cave was securely blocked, but the pipe allowed a thin line of sight through a mesh guard. Through that tiny window, I saw the tops of distant trees swaying gently. No sign of smoke, no visible flame, just the calm after a storm. My heart raced. Was this the first sign that the worst had passed? I checked the radio, hoping for confirmation. The signal was weak but steady. A female voice spoke calmly, "To all survivors, if you can hear this, remain sheltered and conserve resources. Rescue teams are prioritizing zones with stable conditions. We urge patience and caution. Radiation levels have decreased in some areas but remain dangerous. Repeat, do not leave shelter unless instructed." Relief washed over me, but with it came a new wave of anxiety. What if I left too soon? What if the fallout returned with the wind, or some hidden danger lurked outside? I paced the cave, trying to calm my nerves. I reviewed my stockpile again, calculating how many days I had left. Water was my most precious commodity. Even with filters, the risk of contamination was high. Food supplies were holding, but I had no idea what awaited me beyond the cave's mouth. I decided that today I'd do something I hadn't dared since the attack: test the air quality outside. I dug out the small gas mask I'd bought years ago during a survival expo but never really learned how to use. It was old and bulky but better than nothing. Rufus watched me curiously as I packed it in my bag along with a handheld Geiger counter. I wasn't an expert on radiation, but the device had given me peace of mind before. I checked the filters and battery. It beeped faintly, showing low levels. I took a deep breath, adjusted the mask, and prepared for a brief excursion. The cave door was heavy, reinforced with thick timbers and weighted sandbags, but I'd kept a small emergency hatch for ventilation in case of fire or smoke. I carefully unblocked the hatch and cracked it open just enough to slip through. The cool outside air hit me instantly, crisp and faintly sweet. I scanned the horizon. The sky was pale blue, hazy with distant clouds. No ash drifted in sight. I took the Geiger counter out and watched the dial spike briefly before settling into a low reading within safe limits, at least for the moment. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Rufus barked softly, and I smiled despite the tension. I gathered a small sample of soil near the cave entrance and checked it for warmth, moisture, and texture. It was damp but normal. No strange colors, no strange smells. I jotted my findings in the notebook, my handwriting shaky but steady. Returning to the cave was harder than leaving. The narrow hatch forced me to crouch, and every noise outside made me tense. But Rufus stayed calm, wagging his tail, like he knew we'd be okay. Back inside, I cleaned my mask and set the Geiger counter on the shelf. I felt more prepared now, more connected to the outside world, even if only through a crack in the cave. That night, as I lay on the cot with Rufus curled at my feet, I thought about the strange carvings deeper in the cave, the Morse code on the radio, and the scent of pine on the wind. Signs of life. Signs of hope. I whispered into the darkness, "We're still here, Rufus. We're still fighting." The following day was one of the hardest I'd faced. I woke feeling restless and strangely vulnerable, like the cave's walls weren't enough to hold back the weight of the world. After breakfast, I decided to spend some time clearing and reinforcing the entrance. I stacked extra sandbags, tightened the wooden braces, and sealed any small cracks with clay and mud I'd gathered during my last excursion. Rufus helped in his way, barking at every little sound and chasing shadows that didn't exist. While working, I kept my eyes on the tree line beyond the property. The wind had shifted overnight, carrying a faint scent of something burned and metallic. Not far off, maybe a mile or two, there was smoke rising thin, gray ribbons curling slowly into the sky. It was the first sign of fire I'd seen since the attack. Fire meant destruction, but also live people burning wood for warmth or maybe trying to clear land. The unknown was both terrifying and strangely comforting. I finished sealing the cave and went back inside, exhausted. I checked the radio again, hoping for news, but the static had returned full force. No voices, no signals, just white noise. I thought about the Morse code from the days before and turned the radio knob slowly, hoping to catch that hidden tap again. Nothing. I made a mental note to check more often. The cave felt colder as evening crept in, and I wrapped myself in a wool blanket. I fed Rufus and lay back on the cot, listening to the soft dripping of water echoing in the distance. Then, out of the silence, came a faint sound that stopped my breath. It wasn't the usual cave noises. It was something new: footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving just outside the entrance. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed my shotgun from where it leaned against the wall and crept to the door. Rufus growled low in his throat, his body tense beside me. I pressed my ear against the thick timber and listened. The footsteps came again, crunching softly on dirt and gravel. Not human, too heavy and irregular to be an animal. Then a soft voice whispered, "Hello? Anyone there?" My mind raced. Could it be another survivor? Or worse, someone dangerous? I called back softly, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a louder, shaky voice answered, "Please. I'm trapped. I need help." I hesitated, torn between fear and compassion. The fallout zone was dangerous, and I had no idea what this person's condition was. I cracked the door just enough to look out and saw a figure crouched near the bushes, thin, dirty, trembling. The face was gaunt, eyes wide with desperation. I wanted to help, but I also knew the risks. Opening the cave meant exposing myself and Rufus to unknown dangers, radiation, illness, or worse. I shouted softly, "Stay where you are. I'm going to check the radiation first." The stranger nodded weakly but didn't move. I grabbed my Geiger counter and stepped outside, keeping the door barely cracked. The readings near the person's spot were high but dropping, a sign the fallout was settling. I quickly scanned the figure. They coughed softly but looked alive. "Can you walk?" I asked. A nod. "Good. I'm going to bring you inside. Stay calm." I opened the door wider, signaling them to come. Rufus barked once but stayed by my side. The stranger limped inside, leaning heavily on me. Their clothes were tattered, face smeared with dirt and sweat. I offered water and a few crackers. They drank greedily, hands shaking. "Name's Mike," the man said hoarsely. "Was near the city when it happened, got separated from my group." I nodded, feeling the weight of survival pressing down on me. Suddenly, the cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a refuge for another soul. That night, as Mike rested, I made a space on the cot for him and Rufus curled between us. I fed him what I could spare and tried to answer his questions about the outside world. I didn't have many answers. But for the first time since the blast, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't alone. Maybe survival was about more than just waiting out the fallout. It was about connection. About fighting together. The morning light filtered through the small cracks around the cave entrance, painting faint stripes on the rocky floor. Mike was awake, sitting against the wall, eyes alert but tired. He looked at me and Rufus with a mixture of gratitude and wariness, understandable given the chaos we'd both survived. After offering him some of my powdered coffee and dry biscuits, we settled into a quiet routine. I could tell Mike was itching to talk, so I let him lead. He told me about the day of the attack, how sirens had blared in the city, how people scrambled for cover but many never made it. How the sky had turned orange and black with smoke and fire, and how he'd lost track of his family and friends. Listening to him, I realized how lucky I'd been to have this farmland, this cave, and Rufus. But I also felt the weight of guilt for surviving alone so long. Mike asked about the cave, my preparations, and how I'd managed to stay sane in isolation. I shared what I could, the importance of routine, the value of fresh air vents, how to ration food and water, and the mental battle of waiting out the worst. He nodded thoughtfully. "I never thought about any of this," he said. "I was just trying to keep moving, keep breathing." I showed him my notes and the rough map of the cave tunnels. He examined the strange carvings I'd discovered, running a finger along the ancient symbols. "Maybe they're a message, from people who knew how to survive here long ago," he mused. That idea sparked a new energy between us, like the cave held secrets we hadn't yet uncovered, clues to enduring hardship. Over the next few days, we settled into a rhythm. Mike and I took turns keeping watch near the entrance, checking the radio, and exploring the cave's tunnels more cautiously. Rufus kept us company, a silent guardian with eyes that missed nothing. We rationed food carefully, sharing stories about the lives we'd left behind. Mike talked about his wife and kids, his job as a mechanic, and the little joys of city life that now seemed like distant memories. I told him about the farm, the seasons, and the peace I'd found in solitude. Despite everything, laughter sometimes bubbled up between us, small moments of normalcy in an abnormal world. One afternoon, we explored a side tunnel I'd never dared enter alone. It was narrower, damp, and smelled of earth and decay. As we moved deeper, the walls grew colder, and the passage opened into a large cavern with a small underground stream running through it. The water was clear and cool. We drank carefully, using my water filter, and filled a bottle for the main chamber. It was a small victory, fresh water beyond what I'd stored. But more than that, the cave felt alive, like it was offering us a lifeline. Back in the main chamber, Mike spotted something I'd missed, a faint carving near the stream, a circle surrounding a spiral. I took out my notebook and sketched it, feeling a thrill of discovery. Maybe these symbols were a guide, a map, or warnings left by those who came before. That night, as we lay on our cots, Mike whispered, "We're going to get out of here, aren't we?" I didn't answer right away. Hope was fragile in these times, but it was also necessary. I squeezed his shoulder and said, "We will. One step at a time." Days passed slowly in the cave, marked only by the occasional crackle of the radio and the changing light through the ventilation pipe. Mike and I had settled into a routine, balancing exploration, rationing, and keeping watch. Rufus remained ever vigilant, his presence a constant comfort. One morning, the radio came alive with clearer transmissions than we'd heard since the attack. The voice was urgent but steady. "Attention survivors, conditions have improved in several areas. Evacuation efforts will begin shortly. If you can safely reach the designated shelters, do so with caution. Radiation levels are dropping but remain a threat. Do not attempt travel without proper protection and supplies." The news was hopeful, but cautious. It meant rescue was coming, but it also meant venturing out into a world still dangerous. Mike looked at me with a mix of excitement and fear. I felt the same. We began planning a possible exit, mapping routes, and gathering supplies. I checked the Geiger counter frequently. Readings near the cave entrance were stable but fluctuated with the wind. We both knew that timing was crucial. Too soon, and we risked deadly exposure. Too late, and we might miss our chance. Over the next few days, we prepared as best we could. I shared survival tips: how to recognize contaminated water, how to signal for help, and how to avoid lingering fallout pockets. Mike helped reinforce the cave entrance, building a small barrier to protect against debris and small animals. We took turns resting and keeping watch, knowing that our window to leave might open at any moment. Then came a night when the radio broadcast mentioned a nearby convoy passing through the region. The possibility of contact lifted our spirits. We tuned in repeatedly, listening for coordinates, schedules, anything that might guide us. One afternoon, I decided to scout outside briefly with the gas mask and Geiger counter. The air felt cleaner, the sky clearer. The sun was weak but warming. I tested the soil and water samples cautiously, radiation levels were lower but still present. It wasn't safe for long exposure, but it was progress. Returning to the cave, I relayed my findings to Mike. We agreed to wait for the convoy's return and prepare a signal: smoke, markings, anything to attract attention. That night, as I lay beside Rufus, I felt a mix of fear and hope. The world outside was changing, and so were we. Survival had been a solitary fight, but now it was a shared journey. I whispered into the dark, "We're ready, Rufus. Whenever they come, we'll be waiting." The morning after the hopeful radio message, Mike and I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The cave, once just a refuge from destruction, now felt like a launching point for the next stage of survival. We spent the first few hours preparing a signal to alert any nearby rescue teams or passing convoys. I gathered dry twigs, grass, and some of the last remaining tinder from my supplies. Mike, surprisingly resourceful, fashioned a makeshift smoke flare using a piece of cloth soaked in kerosene I'd squirreled away months ago for emergencies. We arranged the materials near the cave's entrance, careful to keep the flame controlled and easy to extinguish if needed. The plan was simple: ignite the flare when we heard signs of nearby rescue, then maintain a low, steady smoke signal until help arrived. During the afternoon, we practiced signaling techniques using a small mirror I'd kept in my survival kit. The sunlight was faint but still enough to catch the attention of anyone in the distance. Mike learned quickly, shining the reflected light against the surrounding hills. It was strange to think how such simple tools, fire, light, could be the difference between life and death now. As evening crept in, the radio crackled again, stronger this time. The announcer's voice was calm but urgent: "Confirmed convoy passing near the Oak Ridge zone. Survivors are urged to signal using visible smoke or light sources. Proceed with caution. Expected arrival in the next 48 hours. I shared the news with Mike, and we both felt the adrenaline spike. 48 hours. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prepare. That night, we double-checked all supplies, packed extra water and food rations, and cleaned the cave entrance for easy access. I laid out the smoke materials where they could be reached quickly, and Mike made sure the mirror and flashlight were ready. We set watches to keep alert through the darkness, the air heavy with anticipation. At some point, I caught myself wondering about the world outside, what it looked like after all the destruction, who else had survived, and whether the people coming to rescue us even existed beyond the static of the radio waves. Those questions filled my thoughts, but I pushed them aside. Focus was survival, and hope was fuel. Around midnight, I heard Mike quietly whisper, "I think I hear engines." My heart leapt. I grabbed the smoke flare and moved toward the entrance with him close behind. We cracked open the cave door just enough to let the night air in, careful to keep the shelter sealed from fallout dust. I struck the match, lit the flare, and held it steady. Smoke curled upward, thin but visible against the dark sky. Rufus barked once, then settled beside me. The sounds grew louder: vehicles rumbling over rough terrain, the hum of diesel engines. The convoy was near. I felt a surge of relief and fear all at once. What would these strangers be like? Would they be friend or foe? I steadied my breath and prepared to meet them, knowing that after all we'd endured, this could be the moment that changed everything. The smoke rose higher, a beacon of survival and resilience in a shattered world. The sound of engines grew louder, echoing against the hills surrounding the cave. I stood near the entrance, smoke flare still glowing faintly in my hand, watching the dark shapes move through the trees. Mike was beside me, tense but steady, and Rufus remained alert, ears perked. My heart hammered in my chest, equal parts hope and fear. After 7 long days of isolation, the world outside felt close again, but I couldn't shake the unease. The convoy vehicles came into view, military trucks and jeeps, dust clouds trailing behind them. They moved cautiously, scanning the area as if expecting danger at every turn. I stepped forward slowly, waving the smoke and shining the mirror flashlight to catch their attention. One of the trucks slowed, and a figure climbed down, silhouetted against the headlights. "Hey! Over here!" I shouted, voice cracking with emotion. The man approached quickly, eyes wide but welcoming. "We heard your signal on the radio," he said, voice steady but warm. "Are you okay? How long have you been here?" I swallowed hard. 7 days. "I'm George, and this is Mike, and that's Rufus." He nodded, taking out a radio to call for backup. More trucks appeared, the convoy expanding as they secured the perimeter. I felt the weight of exhaustion crash over me, but relief came right after. We weren't alone anymore. Medical personnel moved toward us, asking questions, checking for radiation exposure and injuries. I explained how I'd prepared the cave food, water, air vents, and they seemed impressed by the effort. Mike was offered a blanket and food, his condition was fragile but stable. Rufus wagged his tail, receiving pats from the soldiers. As the convoy set up a temporary base nearby, I was led aside to speak with the commander. He was a tall man, grizzled and tired, but his eyes held a spark of determination. "George, your radio signal was the first we picked up in days. You've helped us locate survivors." I nodded, feeling pride mixed with humility. "I just did what I had to." He smiled briefly. "That's what we all have to do now. Rebuild, reconnect, survive." Night fell over the camp, and I lay under a makeshift tent, listening to the distant hum of engines and voices. Mike slept beside me, finally at peace. Rufus rested at my feet, tired but alert. For the first time since the blast, I felt hope bloom in the darkness. The journey wasn't over, but the worst was behind us. And out there, beyond the cave, a new world waited. The morning after the convoy's arrival was crisp and filled with a cautious energy. Camp buzzed with activity, soldiers organizing supplies, medics tending to the injured, and survivors sharing stories. Mike was receiving medical attention, and the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. I watched from the edge of the camp, Rufus beside me, as people moved with purpose. It was a stark contrast to the silence and isolation of the cave. The commander approached me, clipboard in hand. "We're setting up a temporary shelter here for survivors. It's not much, but it's safer than most places right now." He paused. "We'll need people like you, those who've prepared and stayed strong. Your knowledge will help others survive." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. Over the next days, I worked alongside the team, helping build and fortify the shelter. I shared tips on rationing food and water, setting up safe air circulation, and keeping morale high during long waits. Mike grew stronger each day, and the camp began to feel more like a community than a refuge. Rufus became a favorite among the kids and adults alike, his gentle nature a comfort amid uncertainty. At night, I sat by the fire, listening to stories of loss and hope. Survivors spoke of lost homes and loved ones, but also of determination and resilience. I realized that survival wasn't just about shelter or supplies, it was about connection. The strange cave symbols I'd seen came to mind. Maybe they were reminders left by those who understood this truth long ago. One afternoon, as I helped clear debris near the camp's perimeter, a scout returned with news. A nearby settlement had radioed that they were accepting refugees and had medical supplies. A chance to rebuild on firmer ground. The commander gathered us. "We'll send a team to assess the settlement and prepare for evacuation." The mood was hopeful but cautious. That evening, I walked to the edge of the camp, Rufus at my side, and looked out toward the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors of fire and promise. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, I felt ready. We had survived the worst, and now it was time to rebuild, to create new beginnings from the ashes of the old world. The day we left the cave behind felt surreal. After 7 long days underground, the sunlight was almost too bright, too sharp against my tired eyes. Rufus bounded ahead, tail wagging, eager to explore the open world once more. Mike walked beside me, steadier now, though still fragile. The convoy had packed up camp and loaded supplies for the journey to the settlement the scouts had found. As we moved through the charred remnants of the farmland, I took a deep breath of the fresh, smoky air. The world outside was scarred but alive. We crossed fields that had once been golden with crops, now blackened and brittle beneath our boots. Trees stood as skeletons against a pale sky, but birds sang in the distance, a reminder that life persisted. The settlement was a small cluster of buildings, surrounded by makeshift fences and guarded by wary but hopeful people. The medical tents were busy with patients receiving care, and volunteers distributed food and water. It wasn't much, but it was safety. As we settled in, I reflected on the cave that had sheltered me during the worst days, the dark, cold refuge that had become my world. It taught me resilience, patience, and the power of hope. The strange carvings in its walls, the hidden messages on the radio, even the noises in the dark, they were part of a journey I never expected but now cherish. Mike found a warm bed and food he hadn't tasted in days. Rufus made friends quickly, running and playing with other dogs. I helped the settlement leaders organize supplies and set up communication with other survivor groups. Together, we began to dream again of rebuilding homes, reconnecting with lost loved ones, and forging a future from the ruins. At night, beneath unfamiliar stars, I whispered a promise to Rufus and Mike. We made it through the worst. Now it's time to live. The nuclear blast had taken so much, but it couldn't take our will to survive, to hope, to rebuild. Beyond the cave, beyond the fear and darkness, a new world waited, and we would face it together.